Hey guys, it's Charlene. Today I'm going to be sharing with you 3 different cards, lots of fun techniques, and I'm going to be using the brand new Hexi-Gems release from Spellbinders. So we're going to dive right in with our first card. I'm starting out here with a piece of watercolor paper. I like this paper. It's a hot press paper, so it's actually really smooth, which makes it much easier for stamping as well as foiling. So I'm taping this down. I've got some Pixie tape here. Anytime I'm working with a lot of water, I like to make sure and tape down my cardstock because when it dries, it's going to help it to stay flat. So I have a couple of colors of distress ink I'm going to be using. I'm going to be using Picked Raspberry, Squeezed Lemonade, and Salty Ocean. I'm starting out here with the Picked Raspberry, and I have my pink paper pouncer. You absolutely could accomplish this with a blending brush as well. What we're going to be doing is using this triad of primary colors in order to create secondary colors. So I've got the pink, and then I'm coming in with yellow. This is the Squeezed Lemonade. And then at the bottom, I'm going to come in with the blue, which is going to be the Salty Ocean. And where the pink and yellow overlap, we're going to get orange. Where the yellow and blue overlap, we're going to get green. And where the blue and the pink overlap, we're going to get purple. And this is going to create a really beautiful background once we add some water in here. You just want to be careful that you don't overlap the colors too much in the center, because the combination of these 3 colors can definitely give you a brown muddy color. So you can see I'm kind of going in a circle here and trying not to overlap in the center. That's going to help a lot once I add water. Very simple to do, but this type of background really packs a punch. It looks really gorgeous behind a foiled image, which is what we're going to do today, but it also looks amazing behind a stamped image. So if you have a large floral, you also could stamp over and make this beautiful card. You don't necessarily need foiling plates that I'm using today in order to create this style of card, although the plates are absolutely gorgeous. So once I get everything where I like it, I'm going to come in with my distress sprayer, and I'm just going to spray a couple of times over the cardstock in order to get some droplets as well as some misting. And then I'm not going to mess with it at all. And that's really hard to do, especially for me. I like to move things around and mess around with stuff, but when you're creating this style of background, you just want those water droplets to just sit there. Now, I am a little bit impatient and did not let it air dry. I came in with my heat tool, but I was really careful not to blow those droplets around in order to kind of keep those real big spots where the colors have pushed away from each other. Love distress ink. It's such a fun type of ink. So once I was done, I brought back in the same exact colors and I just lightly went over those same areas. And that's because I wanted to give a light haze of color to the areas where the droplets had pushed apart and created the white space. And you can see it just kind of blends out the piece, makes it look a little bit more dreamy. I really love how this looks. It also sort of brightens everything back up again. Hopefully you can see that on camera, how it's brightening those colors back up. Once I get everything how I like it, I'm going to go ahead and dive in with some hot foiling. I'm going to start out here with some silver foil, and I'm using my Fiskars paper trimmer here. It has a blade that runs along that ruler there. I find that this style of trimmer makes it really easy to cut the foil, and I prefer to use it over a pair of scissors because I get nice straight lines and because I can measure more easily, so I can get kind of the smallest piece of foil that I need in order to foil the image, and that helps me reduce my chances of any kind of over foiling. I like to put everything together by putting my cardstock and then the foil and then the plate and taping it all down. And once my platform is nice and hot, I set everything on there, hit the timer button, and then once the timer's done, I can move the whole thing over to my Platinum 6 die cutting machine. then put the shim and top plate on and run it through one time. That's definitely all you want to do. You just want to do one time. If you pass through multiple times, you definitely increase the possibility of your plate skipping and getting foiling where you don't want it. But you're going to see here, this comes out perfectly, no overfoiling, and it's really beautiful. I mentioned earlier I'm using hot pressed watercolor paper. And that helps a lot because the paper is very smooth. So you're going to get a nice impression there with the foil. And doesn't that look gorgeous with that water droplet background? So beautiful. All right, while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and foil my sentiments. So again, this time I'm using black cardstock, but I've got the cardstock, the foil, then my plate, and then I'm going to tape everything down. And the reason I like to do it this way is because I can make sure that plate is not going to move around on anything. And I'm just reusing the Pixie tape that I used from when I was doing the watercoloring. But I also use my highlighter tape a lot when I'm doing this, and it works just as well. Now, for whatever reason, the black cardstock tends to curl up, but it's not a big deal. That doesn't impact anything. Once it's done, I go ahead and put my shim and my top plate on there and again, run it through just one time and I get some really gorgeous results. I mentioned this is the Hexi-Gems release from Spellbinders. So you saw that beautiful bloom piece that I'm going to be using on all of the cards today. It does come with a die, so you can cut it out if you want to. And then you have this set of beautiful sentiments, and you'll see I'm going to cut these out in a moment. But I went ahead and did a second set of the sentiments while I was here, and I used the Prism foil. So pretty. All right, so the die that you use with the sentiments is great. It's this nice little banner die. And I like that you're able to go ahead and hot foil all these sentiments at once and then also cut them all out at once. And then you can just stick them in the back of your bag and you have them ready to go. Or you could put them, in a drawer or a little container so you have them right there to grab a sentiment whenever you need them. And this is a really nice variety of sentiments as well. So you can use these for all kinds of different cards. So they cut really cleanly. You can see these all cut out beautifully. They all foiled beautifully. I love the Spellbinders plates. They definitely know what they're doing there. This next step could be done before or after foiling. I chose to do it after foiling. So I've got a small acrylic block there, coming back in with the Picked Raspberry Distress ink. I just smushed some there on the block, and now I am using my water brush pen, and I've just squeezed out a tiny bit of water, and I'm moving it all around on there so I can mix up the ink with the water. And now I can just flick off of the side of that acrylic block to get some really nice splatter that's a very bright, vibrant pink on the cardstock. And I'm going to do the exact same thing with the Salty Ocean. I didn't feel like I needed to bring in any of the yellow splatters, but I thought the bright pink and bright blue just kind of elevated this up a little bit. You do want to let it sit and dry once you have done this because you don't want to smear any of your splatters when you're putting your card together. I am going to be using a black card base with this card because I'm going to use that black sentiment that we did earlier with the foiling. So I've got my piece here. It is cut down so that I will have a nice border around it. And I'm using some liquid adhesive here. You could use double-sided tape, whatever you prefer, but I'm going to glue it directly on the card base. And you can see I've got about 1/4 inch border all the way around. I cut out another piece of white cardstock that's the exact same size, and I'm going to glue this here on the inside of the card. And in retrospect, I wish I had gone ahead and foiled part of that image on the inside piece as well. I think that would look kind of cool to have your color on the outside with the foiled blooms, and then on the inside just have the plain foiled blooms without any coloring, but do it maybe down in one of the corners so that way there's still plenty of room to write your sentiment or your personal message on the inside. So I'm going to pop up the sentiment strip here with a piece of foam tape. This is the Heavy Doodle strips. I use these a lot for shaker cards, but I'm just measuring out how long of a piece I need, and then I'm going to cut it here with my little X-Acto knife. And this makes it pretty easy to do and not get your fingers all sticky or mess up your strip and kind of stretch it out or anything like that. So if you struggle with these kinds of foam strips, give that a try. It's my little tip there, because then you can just pop your sentiment strip right on there. You know it's going to be the exact right length you need, and then you can just pull that whole strip off once you have it adhered. So not a lot of dimension on this card other than the popped up sentiment, but that foiling with the bright color is very beautiful. All right, we're moving on to our second card here. I am hot foiling the blooms again, and this time I am using some of the Prism foil. The Prism foil is really pretty. It has kind of this holographic look to it, so when you move it in the light, you pick up some like purple and blue colors in addition to the silver. It's very pretty. And I am using my Spectrum Noir cardstock here because I'm going to be doing some alcohol ink coloring, and that's my preferred paper. It's also just in general a very, very smooth cardstock. So if you struggle with foiling, it's a great cardstock for foiling. So here's the coordinating die that I mentioned. I am going to go ahead and cut out this whole piece. I'm going to use some Copic markers here, some really soft pastel colors. For the pinks, I'm using R00 and R20. For these blues, I'm using BG10 and BG01. And then for the leaves, I'll be doing those in green with G00 and YG41. I've got some kind of peachy orange-ish colors that I'm going to be using down here on these. Might actually supposed to be leaves, but I kind of thought they were tiny flower buds. I thought that would look nice. So I used some YR000 and YR61. And then for the purple, I used some V12. And there you can see I did a silly little transition and markers went everywhere on my desk. But anyway, for my background, I used a piece of pattern paper, and this actually comes from the Floral Friendship release that was recent from Spellbinders. And I have a video where I made a bunch of pattern paper strip cards using this gorgeous pattern paper, but I thought it worked really well with this card as well. So I'm going to glue that onto a piece of white cardstock just because I want to thicken it up a little bit. I actually have 2 pieces of white cardstock. I want this to pop off of the card base a little bit, so some added dimension, but nothing crazy. So I'm going to glue those together, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the foiled blooms there. I'm going to glue 2 of the die cuts of white cardstock behind it just to add some dimension. And then same thing for the sentiment. I cut out some extra sentiment strips just using the die from the sentiment strips, and I'm going to glue those together as well. So going ahead and gluing that to my card base, I just have a white card base here and everything's been trimmed down, so I again have a nice border all the way around the edge. I really like having a border on my cards. The more and more I make cards, I very rarely do a full front card panel. I almost always put a border on there, and I'm not sure why, because I see other people's cards that they make without borders, and I think they look very, very pretty. What do you guys like to do? Let me know down in the comments. All right, so I'm gluing my beautiful floral blooms there towards the bottom right hand corner, and that way I can make sure that some of that fun scripty writing that is on the pattern paper is going to be showing. And then I'm going to glue my sentiment right over the top of that. I am going to come in and add a few of the Trinity Stamps crystal clear embellishments. They are just tiny little jewels, and I like them because they do have a bit of a flat back to them, so they're easier to glue onto your card. But that finishes up the second card. I did add a little strip of the pattern paper on the inside of the card as well. For my third card, I went ahead and foiled on black cardstock, and here I am using the Hexi-Gems Essentials dies. Now this set does include 14 different dies, which is awesome. You have everything from a 1-inch tall gem all the way up to a 5.5-inch tall gem. So whatever size you need, however many layers you want to make, it's a very, very nice set of dies. And it's just a fun kind of different shape from your standard, rectangle or oval. So I'm cutting out the blooms using the second to the largest of these dies. And I'm just making sure I get all of the floral piece in there. I don't want to cut off any of the floral piece. And then I'm going to be doing a fun technique that I don't do very often, but is super simple. I'm going to come in and I'm going to do some very, very basic watercoloring with my Distress Oxides. I've started out here with some Kitsch Flamingo, but I do actually change my mind and come back in with Picked Raspberry. But all you do is you smush out some of your Distress Oxide, and you can do that onto a glass mat, or if you don't have a glass mat, you can do it onto an acrylic block. And then I have a water brush here, and I'm just using a very small amount of water. You don't want to use a lot of water because that's going to dilute your ink color and it's going to make it so it's not as bright. What is fun about this technique is because you are watercoloring with an oxide onto a black cardstock, you're going to still see the color. It's going to be very vibrant and bright and beautiful. I mentioned I do switch from the Kitsch Flamingo to Picked Raspberry, and that's because I wanted it to be even brighter. I felt like the Kitsch Flamingo was just a little bit too pastel for what I was going for. For my blue, I'm coming in here with some Broken China, which is a very bright, vibrant blue. It looks really pretty. Again, adding just a very small amount of water. And you don't have to do this with a water brush. You could do this with a paintbrush if you would prefer. And you're going to see at first here, I thought I just wanted to add a couple of details in here and there with the colors. But ultimately, I decided that I liked it better with the flowers colored in completely. So I do go in and add some more color and fill in the entirety of the flowers. A couple of things to keep in mind when you're doing this technique. One, the foil does act as a resist. So what that means is if you color onto the foil, the ink and water is going to tend to kind of bead off of there back onto the cardstock. You don't want to put too much ink onto your foil for a couple of reasons. One, it's not 100% resistant, meaning that if you get enough onto the foil, it will dry there. And I'll show you how to fix that when I get done here with the coloring. But also, because you are coloring over foil with water, you do run the risk if you put too much water onto that foil of the foil kind of coming off, lifting off of the card. So just be careful. I still try to paint kind of around and not go over the foil, but it is nice that if I get any onto the foil, it kind of beads off of there, or if any dries onto the foil, I can very easily get it off, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Now here I'm using some cracked pistachio for my leaves, and that's going to finish up the watercoloring portion. I'm not going to color all of the leaves. I'm just going to kind of sporadically color them here and there. I decided not to color in all of the image. I wanted to leave some of it just plain with the black with the foiling. And then the other thing I was going to mention is that you can go over this a couple of times to increase kind of that boldness of the color. Just let it dry and then come back in with another layer of the color, and that'll really bring it up a notch or two. So now here is where you can clean off the foil. All you need to do is use your water brush pen and put a tiny little bit of water onto the foil part until it starts to lift some of the ink, and then just come in with a tissue and dab off that extra color. Again, don't do it too many times or bring in too much water because you don't want to actually lift the foil up. So pretty. Such a fun and easy technique to do. And now I'm going to put my card together. I did use the largest of the Hexi-Gems to cut out a piece of white cardstock. And I'm going to put everything down onto a light gray card base. I think this card turns out so elegant. I love it. So I've got my liquid adhesive on the white gem, and I'm just going to place that in the center there. It's actually pretty easy to line up. If you get your card base lined up on your mat, then all you have to do is make sure the 2 points of the gem, the top and the bottom, go right along that center line. Easy way to line things up. I did add some black foam tape on the back of my black cardstock piece with the coloring so that it can pop up a little bit on the front of the card. It just adds a touch of drama. Love how it looks. And then I'm going to come in and add my sentiment. And for my sentiment, I'm actually going to use one of the white strips that we created with the Prism foil. So it's a nice kind of little contrast because you have the pretty purple and blues that pick up with the light on the sentiment strip, but then you have just the straight silver foiling around the blooms. So pretty. I think this might be my favorite card out of the 3. Here they are again, that beautiful watercolor droplet background. Then we have the alcohol ink coloring, and lastly, the watercoloring with the Distress Oxides. All right, guys, I hope you picked up some tips and tricks today. Please be sure to like and subscribe, as well as hit that notification bell so that I can continue bringing you more crafting content in the future. Until next time, happy crafting.